Hey, how's it going, everybody? And welcome back into the SFS channel for yet another episode of Mock Draft Week here. Today's day 5. We've got 7 days total, 2 left to go here, where we are just pumping out an extra video per day, a mock draft on top of the regularly scheduled content here. So once again, for I think this is like the second or third day in a row, we're not joined by any subscribers or community Discord members. But that's coming. Tomorrow's episode will be with other players, so it won't just be the ADP here. We'll be rocking with the guys, making their picks. It'll be a bit of a longer video, so that's the bonus of just me drafting with the ADP and keeping these relatively efficient with some good information still and some new players being talked about, hopefully in every episode here. As always, I try and switch up my picks, so we're back to the 1-3 draft spot today for that. But if you want to be able to take advantage of that opportunity to draft with me, be a part of that Discord chat, and get in some of these mock drafts with me, the link to the free community Discord invite is in the description of today's video. So you just got to go down there, find that, click that up, join it. This video is coming out early on Friday morning. If you're able to join that up and hop in the chat sometime around lunchtime tomorrow, you should still have a couple hours to get in that mock draft before we actually get things kicked off and started. So plenty of opportunities, though. If you miss out, we'll be filming another one of those episodes later on in the weekend for Mock Draft Monday that'll come out, obviously, on Monday morning. So stay tuned for all that stuff. Today, we've got up on the block a regularly old standard mock draft here. This hasn't been something that I focused in too greatly on the channel over the course of its existence here, but it's still good to talk about. I've been getting some questions about it lately. So a 10-team standard league is what we are doing for today's episode. And certainly there will be a little bit of a different way that I will ultimately be assessing and valuing these players in some aspects of their production. So we'll go ahead here, get the draft started, and there he goes. So Derrick Henry is the 1.1 pick. I was actually hoping he might fall to me at the 1.3 so I could talk about him a little bit here and why I might choose to take him over an Alvin Kamara, who's ranked higher than him in my half PPR rankings. But nonetheless, I would be a fool to pass on Christian McCaffrey here. So we'll make that draft pick in just a second, just so you know what's going on there. But I'm just going to keep talking while I've got the pick made in my head and the draft timer to break down the board here. So essentially why I would be taking a Derrick Henry over an Alvin Kamara is simply, in standard leagues, I think it's more about looking for players who have strong volume to give you that fantasy floor, especially at the running back position, because catching passes isn't going to do you any good. Sometimes efficient play is nice, but it's not going to give you an extra advantage for an Alvin Kamara per se, who, when you're catching 80-plus passes in a season, that's not worth a single point, where that's worth over 40 points, even in just half PPR. So it makes a big difference. Another thing that when you're trying to kind of play the cards here in these standard leagues, the thing you're shooting for with upside is you really want to try and find those players who you think have the chance to score a high collection of touchdowns. That is something that's pretty tough to do. There's a certain size of player, a certain skill type, and a certain niche of players I like to kind of fit into this mold as being great standard league fits, because I think they're able to do that. But I've said in a lot of times in a lot of videos, touchdown production is one of the toughest and trickiest things to try and assess in a fantasy player's value season in and season out. It's something that can absolutely skyrocket randomly and can completely tank and fall off a cliff at other points. So I'll make this pick here as the clock's winding down. But like, for example, Alvin Kamara in the 2019 season, I forget the exact number, but it was somewhere between like 7 and 9 total touchdowns for him on the season. And then he comes out last year and has 21. Like, Alvin Kamara is certainly one of the most elite running backs in fantasy football, but he's also a player who you typically wouldn't think of as a standard league play. He's definitely more so a PPR play. And while a lot of those touchdowns came through the air and through the work that he did in that phase of the game, he was still producing elite standard numbers. But Derrick Henry has less of a pass-catching role. The volume we're getting from him is strictly on the ground. He gives us a high level of yardage output in the running game department on a per-week basis. I wouldn't be shocked to see him between 1,500 to 1,700 yards this season. I don't think he'll quite crack 2,000 again, because that's just an absurd marker to be at. But you understand the point I'm making here. You want players, and again, he is a bulldozer. So what does that tell me? Goal line usage. The versatility to have positional utility in the red zone is something that you absolutely need to look for in all of these players. Christian McCaffrey, my first-round draft pick, 100% is a better player in PPR leagues. But what else does he do? He scores a lot of touchdowns for this team. They just simply don't have a player on their roster who specializes or makes me afraid that he is going to steal his opportunities inside the 20-yard line. Mike Davis would have been that player last year, and none of us were worried about him whatsoever because Christian McCaffrey has a pure 3-down skill set that allows him to be utilized in virtually every situation, every area of the field. It's great. So I got to check the running back crop one more time just to make sure before we move on here that there isn't any other names I'd rather have. Joe Mixon's a player I'd feel fantastic about in standard leagues because he has some of the best volume in fantasy. I think I can roll the dice here if I play this right, get myself a Najee Harris or a J.K. Dobbins, who I also think have very good touchdown ceiling here. But there's also a lot of wideouts I like. Well, all right, they gave it to us at the horn. So I was going to pass on Joe Mixon there, and I decided not to. It was a little bit of obviously an impulsive pick because I was out of time and I did not want to get auto-drafted because I was afraid I wouldn't like the option there. So I took an option that this is why I waited when I was talking and already knew my pick with CMC because I knew I was going to get beat by that horn. I need to just increase the timer, but I'll forget to put it back then when we're doing subscriber mock drafts. And then the auto pick won't turn on if somebody misses. Oh, it's just terrible. It's a lose-lose, guys. Trust me. I need to write a note or something. But anyways, we're wasting even more valuable time here. So I get myself 2 running backs I feel very strongly about at the top of my draft board. Elite volume plays. Christian McCaffrey was, I believe, I think his total touches per game was 20. I want to say it was 24.2. per game in the contest he was able to go for last season. That might be slightly off because I think Dalvin Cook led fantasy players with 25.3, and I think McCaffrey might have been 25.1. I think that's actually the marker he was at. So crazy volume there. And then Joe Mixon he didn't play very many games as well last season, but he was hovering around 23 to 23.3 touches per game, which again is crazy usage for a back who the rest of the guys in his offense are not really infringing upon his ability to score touchdowns, and that volume is going to give him a nice fantasy floor on a per week basis. So another thing we have to be incredibly careful about doing in these standard leagues is going too running back dependent. You still need to find upside. I would argue that we have great upside with Christian McCaffrey at the 1.3, but I would also argue that Joe Mixon's upside isn't as much as we would like to think it is all that fantastic. So what I'm going to do here is I wanted to come out here and snatch Darren Waller, but I'm going to wait here. And I'm going to take a Justin Jefferson. Why? This gives me upside as my number 1 wide receiver. He is my wide receiver 9.5 PPR scoring. Things might be adjusted a little bit. I don't have official standard league rankings or official full PPR rankings because I think that half PPR is the best way to meet in the middle and just be efficient with things because I think it's very easy if you are someone playing in a half PPR league, or a standard league, to look at those rankings and then just kind of stack the players up against each other on the board and then have your determining tie-breaking factor as to whether a player moves up or stays put on the board simply be, okay, how different do I see these two players' touchdown production and volume impacting their fantasy seasons? If I see one player like an A.J. Brown who really needs those touchdowns because the volume isn't great, and then I can stack him up against a player like a DeAndre Hopkins who had insane volume last year, but his touchdowns were down a little bit, I'm taking D-Hop every time because I'm betting that volume will stay constant year over year because of the situation he's in, whereas A.J. Brown's probably not going to see an increase, and maybe actually we'll see, this is a long shot, but he could potentially see a decrease in targets next year on a per-game basis. He was unhealthy, only played 14 games, so if he technically plays the whole season, he will see an increase because there's 3 extra games to be had there with the new 18-game schedule. But you understand what I'm saying here. For a player that cracked double-digit touchdowns versus a player that had 160 targets and only had 7 receiving touchdowns, there's a lot of difference of production to be had here. So the Jefferson pick gives me elite upside. He also had 140 targets in just 14 starts. So I like that volume. I like that upside. Only 7 TDs for Jefferson last year. Again, a player that could trend up in that category. So a really nice dart throw if you ask me. And then, oh man, do I take... You see, the value is far too good to pass on here. Somehow, by the good graces of the fantasy gods, J.K. Dobbins fell to me all the way at the 4-8. So this is a 10-team draft. You are going to see value fall a lot in these drafts, and you have got to hit those RBs early and often, especially in these standard leagues. Again, I do not promote drafting 3 in a row, and Team 4 decided to really go on RB crack there and take 4 in a row. But I think that it's important to sprinkle in a wide receiver or an elite tight end. And dang, I got my next player too. So 2 great back-to-back picks, and I am now feeling ecstatic about how this team is coming together. J.K. Dobbins is a player who is maybe not so much of a volume play as a Joe Mixon is, but holy cow, does this guy have some ceiling, and he is used on the goal line. He saw a lot of usage and a lot of production in the touchdown department on not a crazy usage rate. This is a player that can definitely improve in that area of the field. And I think it's a safer expectation because, again, when players score a lot of touchdowns, I don't like to project them to score more. I think it's safer and does us the most favor to ourselves if we project them to A, stay the same, or B, see slight regression. I don't want to ever come out and say, except in the case of maybe an Alvin Kamara who scored over 20, that a player is going to maybe drop off by 5 or more TDs. That's unrealistic, but it's also unrealistic to say that that J.K. Dobbins is going to jump out here. Jacobs want the next pick, is going to jump out here and score 5 more than he did last season just because he's playing more games. No, his touchdown production was unusually high for the limited amount of role that he had on that team. So we've got to be somewhat reasonable here. But I think the upside's great. His explosion is awesome. And he does give a little bit of a counter production point to that Joe Mixon floor value, whereas he's more of a ceiling play. So Darren Waller's my easy next pick up here. I was thinking about taking him in the late 4th, and he falls to us in the early 5th round here. This is a player. He's got better touchdown upside over the last 2 seasons than George Kittle. That's just what the numbers show. Kittle hasn't cracked more than 5 touchdowns in any year of his NFL career. Darren Waller's outpaced him in that department in 2 years in a row. This is a player who also has pretty much a stranglehold on the passing work share of that Raiders offense. Someone's going to have to step up and take it from him. Waller's the proven face on the field. A new name is going to have to come out and earn those reps from him. George Kittle's got 2 established young receivers with a lot of talent. And George Kittle's probably the best all-around player of those 3. But Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk are going to get their looks when they're healthy and on the field. So, man, this is an interesting situation. So I think I've already got kind of my prospective pick lined up here for, oh boy, there's a lot of players I like here. I could go a complete different direction than I have typically been preaching here on the channel. Switch things up, talk about players. Heck, that's what I'm going to do here because I like the upside, and this is what we got to do. I'm always trying to balance out my floor with my upside in all leagues, but particularly these standard leagues, because if you get too touchdown dependent on your roster, things will start to go south. So that's why I've got those volume running backs that'll give me a safe floor, but then I'm trying to go out here. We hit a home run with Justin Jefferson in the 3rd round. That gives us floor and ceiling. Darren Waller, floor and ceiling. Christian McCaffrey, floor and ceiling. Mixon, I would say, is more strongly a floor play. Dobbins, more so a strong ceiling play. We're going with another ceiling threat here because I think there's a lot of floor on this team already. I'm going to take Odell Beckham Jr. This is a player who just yesterday made my do not draft fantasy players lists. Typically, I drafted him in the late 6th round here, so it doesn't seem that bad. But typically, he is going higher because I usually do 12 teams, league sizes as my standard here on the channel. So it is a bit of a value, but typically he is going earlier in the raw round perspective of things, closer to the middle of the 5th round, obviously the late 6th here, but there is fewer picks per round, so that's noted. The reason I want to pick OBJ is because I really haven't talked about him as much or why I don't like him. And I did that in yesterday's video. It's plain and simple. There's too many risk factors in this offense that I'm not a big fan of that make me shy away from him. The ACL injury, 60% run to 40% pass for that Browns offense makes it incredibly tough for me as a fantasy player to want to invest into a guy who's not going to get much volume, has injury history, his quarterback has better stats when he's off the field, and this shouldn't play an impact into your fantasy evaluation of a player, but he can be kind of a diva and be a negative force in the locker room, which might divide things. But here's why I might be wrong about Odell Beckham Jr. Look where we're picking A.J. Brown. And I saw this from shout out to Fantasy Guides on Instagram. Saw a great post by him. He said something, and I'm not totally convinced, but for the sake of this mock draft, I'm going to do something a little different here. He said, we're still drafting A.J. Brown in the middle of the second round. Tell me what's different about their situations. Yes, A.J. Brown, and this actually would swing things more so in the favor of OBJ, and I got to make a pick here, so I'm going to slow down for a second and do that, and then we'll jump back into what I was saying. Oh boy, we've gotten ourselves into trouble. All right. Okay. Go Rojo there. What was I saying here? So Odell Beckham Jr. This swings in the favor of what I was about to say of OBJ's fantasy stock and negatively impacts the light that we might view A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown has a better second option in his offense and the passing game than OBJ does. Jarvis Landry is dang good, but Julio Jones, when he's healthy, is just better. It's plain and simple. I would argue that Julio Jones is a bigger risk, a bigger threat to A.J. Brown's fantasy volume than Jarvis Landry is to Odell Beckham's. And they're the same type of player. Yes, A.J. Brown, much more muscular, much more physically imposing, but still is a deep threat, a big threat scorer, a deep threat scorer, and is a player that is highly productive in the red zone. Odell's a little bit more flashy, but his game is still stretching the field over the top, big plays on long slant routes. That's his thing. He's not a volume play anymore. These are both players whose explosive value gives them their fantasy value and their ceilings. They're both going to have stinkers this year. They are both going to have probably really ugly games. We saw it already with Beckham last year. I think at this point in their careers, A.J. Brown might just be better, but Beckham is going as the wide receiver 28 right now. You're seeing some of the names on the board that are going above him. And I think that for a player who we once thought of as a Hall of Fame talent, maybe, just maybe, there's a chance that he can prove us wrong and actually do some very good things for lineups this season. So, yes, I'm also Tannehill over Baker Mayfield. Yes, I'd rather have the Titans' offensive situation and just the team because I think that maybe the Browns will be a better squad this year, which hurts fantasy value because they'll be running the ball late in games more, whereas the Titans will have to make up for a lackluster defense and keep throwing. But nonetheless, there is reason to like Odell Beckham Jr. if you can wait on him and get a nice value for him. So, I got to make another pick here. All right, it's about time I go for a quarterback. I wanted to go Robbie Anderson, but I was winding down the clock, and I just kind of had the thought flash across my head. Ding, ding, ding. Robbie Anderson's a PPR play. The reason I like Robbie Anderson is the volume he's going to get. But once again, that volume means nothing when your passes caught don't give you extra points at the wide receiver position. So, whereas I like that a lot at the running back position because typically you're going forward, gaining positive yardage almost every play, wide receivers can have a million targets thrown their way and still only catch half of them. You get what I'm saying here? Jerry Jeudy, I think, is either 52% or the point being, Jerry Jeudy saw 113 targets last year, and I think he only caught 52 of them. So his percentage was less than 50 of his passes caught. That's pretty inefficient. That's pretty not good. If a player sees that, they're not going to be giving you any points for all those targets thrown their way. Targets are great. Targets do give us floor for elite talent, but Robbie's not a guy that scores touchdowns, and if Robbie doesn't put up enough yards, we're going to be looking at a very, very, very average wide receiver 3 or even 4 in standard scoring. So, whereas a Jefferson's talent, I trust much more to find the end zone, get me positive yards, have a higher catch percentage. Anderson's a bit more of a risky play. Back to this Rojo pick here, though. This is a player who I think, and I've said multiple times over the past calendar year, could be a top 12 RB if they would just give him a workhorse share of that offense. But playoff Lenny's not going anywhere, so that's going to infringe upon his fantasy value. But he's a big physical back. He can be used on the goal line. That's pretty much the thought process behind the pick there. And I'm just trying to deepen that running back room. Man, I got to make a pick here. Let's go another route that I haven't typically gone here on the channel. So I'll break this one down in just a second. Russell Wilson, it's a fairly easy pick to understand why I made that high upside quarterback play. A lot of touchdowns. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Dwayne Eskridge should help out. Gerald Everett's a sleeper tight end threat that could have some really good upside. A lot of things to like about that. Hopefully he can be more consistent this season. Looking at that wide receiver board, I saw two names, Brandon Cooks and Robbie Anderson, that I love in my half PPR or full PPR leagues because of the target volume they'll see, and then if they can rack up receptions, the points that will follow. Deebo Samuel is a player who I think actually finds the end zone more. I think he'll be less so utilized on a raw numbers basis, but I expect him to find yardage in both the fact that he's going to be a very productive player after the catch when catching those screen passes at the line of scrimmage, and he'll be a dang good player in the run game as well. They use him as a jet sweep player. They use him on end arounds, reverses. They do all that fancy stuff with him there in San Francisco. If he can stay healthy, he should find the end zone in multiple ways potentially as a rusher and receiver, and I just think that phase of his game can be a little bit better than people expect. So in my half PPR leagues, it's no question. I'm taking Robbie or Cooks over a Deebo Samuel. But for this league's format, I think it makes more sense for us to go a different direction. That's what sets apart. Running backs are always the most valuable position, unless we're talking 2 QB or super flex leagues. Then it gets a little dicey. Is it the quarterback or the running back spot? Half PPR and full PPR, running backs are still more valuable, but it's closer. It's much closer. Standard leagues, running backs are king. Running backs are prime. You need elite running backs. Those are where the touchdowns are coming from. That's where the elite production's coming from. And that is what 100% wins and loses leagues in this scoring format. The receivers and the volume, the targets we see later on the board are still great, but the touchdown upside is not. The value is bad. So you're looking at players who in half PPR or full PPR leagues might be very, very solid players. In this type of a league scoring format, they might be very, very average. So to go along with that there, I again, did not want to get buzzer picked. Shame on me. That happens too often here on the channel. So Nyheim Hines is a perfect example of a player that you shouldn't like for standard leagues because all he does is catch passes. So that honestly, I don't know. I don't know what would have been more useless. Mike Gesicki being my second tight end on this team who's never going to see a start with Darren Waller there, or Nyheim Hines, who is absolutely a full PPR play. Can find value for him in half PPR, but that's a trade bait asset right there. That's just filling out that running back room a lot deeper than it needs to be. I would have rather had Latavius Murray here for sure at this spot. I'm more pure rusher. But again, I wasn't going to like whatever happened to me there. I talked too long and let my fate fall to the hands of the random click or Mike Gesicki, who has COVID apparently. Nice. All right. Let's make a real pick this time. The running back room, I mean, that was my 5th running back taken. I do think it still looks great, all things considered there. Not too in love with the receivers still, though. I think Devonte Smith could be a sneaky pick here. We've only got, 2, 3 receivers. Since we just had that blunder, it might be smart to, I don't know. I could reach. I mean, I don't really want a second quarterback here either. I don't think that helps this team really do much. I don't think Devonte Smith will be there if I wait either. Devontae Parker is not someone I'm confident in really any league scoring format. He is a player that has the size and wingspan to score in the red zone, but I think there's just too many other guys that'll get looks before him, and I don't think his touchdown production will be that fantastic to turn heads and make him relevant there. So I'm going to reach a little bit and take a Devonte Smith. The reason here being I think he can be the number one pass catcher on that Eagles team, and just that in of itself will be useful. I don't expect him to be an extremely high-producing touchdown guy, but between 6 and 8, 1,000 yards, that'll get the job done as a flex wide receiver candidate for this lineup. Play him in weak matchups against the Cowboys, play him in matchups. I mean, I guess you really don't want to be starting him against the Washington football team or the Giants, but he'll have other good games on that schedule, and there'll be a chance for him to step up and do some work. If he can stay healthy, like I said, he should absolutely, in half PPR leagues, be a high-end wide receiver 2, but in these standard leagues, you're probably looking at more low-end wide receiver 2 to high-end wide receiver 3 type territory. So another interesting thing is I could double dip into tight end. I hate doing that traditionally. It's so unsatisfying to take a second tight end when you've already invested such high capital into a Darren Waller. But these are guys who score touchdowns, plain and simple. That's where you find that value at. I might go Jamal Williams here, though. I think it might be a little bit too good to pass on him. The QB room still has names I like in it, so yeah, 100%. We're going Jamal Williams here. We're going to wait a tad because there's a lot of other quarterbacks that can produce for us in the seldom occurrence that we have to make a start of a player outside of Russell Wilson. Yeah, so we're going to see that play out right here, actually. Stafford went off the board. I might just want to wait here for Trevor Lawrence. Yeah, Kirk Cousins, I like a lot of it as his floor value, but we'll play the cards here, see what happens. Trey Sermon should not still be on the board. However, he is, so we're going to draft him here. I don't know why I'd wait. Rookie running back, all that upside, all that potential. See what I'm doing here in today's mock draft? I am just hammering home. I would completely remove the Nyheim Hines pick from this equation here. I love the way this team came together. I want to go so RB heavy in my standard leagues that it's nauseating. And like I said, at the top end of the board, especially in this 10-team league here, this team would be a lot thinner had I made this a 12-team league. But I had to throw in a wide receiver early and an elite tight end early because that ultimately helps stabilize my upside and increase the ceiling and room for growth this team has. But going RB 2 of the first 3 rounds is the goal. And then if you can hit on a very good player in 3 of the first 4, I would have loved to go David Montgomery here as well. He actually went before Dobbins. So just kind of adding fuel to the fire here. But then Trey Sermon gives me such elite upside. It would be crazy to pass on him. Raheem Mostert's a great player for that 49ers offense right now. He does things that are really efficient, does things that not many other backs can do. But if he goes down to injury, which he is very, very well known, has been prone to struggle with that, might just be looking at yourself an RB1 level producer the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season this year, maybe even sooner than that. I like the idea of a Nelson Aguilar here. It's definitely enticing at the wide receiver spot. I could go Adam Trautman. Let's go Nelson Aguilar here. Led the Raiders in receiving touchdowns outside of Darren Waller last year, but now is a New England Patriot. I'd argue he's by far the best player that has the chance to be a field stretcher on that Pats offense. Jacoby Myers is the team's number 1 option right now, but it's a very low-end number 1 option. N'Keal Harry also is not even listed as a starter, so a lot of stuff's going down in training camp, but I think Aguilar can be the threat that kind of takes the top off this defense here and there, and at least gives them a reason to respect the pass game in New England, which is something they need desperately because the run game is not pulling the wagon enough. Trautman's still on the board, so it's an option. I think I might want to go with my second quarterback here, though. With a guy like Russell Wilson already on this team, I don't know why I would need to take a floor play in Kirk Cousins. I'm going to go with the ceiling here. Trevor Lawrence, he's got a cakewalk of a schedule this year. The Jags, obviously being the first overall pick, have a very light load. And then the fact that the Jags are going to be passing the ball a lot because they're still going to be trailing, and they're still going to be losing late in a lot of ball games. Hopefully, not too many of the defenses I like went off the board there. Perfect. We can still get Cleveland and a good pass rush. So we'll make that draft pick here, then kind of close out the last statements, review the team, and then send you guys into the weekend here. But Trevor Lawrence, again, the volume is going to be fantastic. The pass catching options he has are very quality as well. They're young, inexperienced, but that'll change here in the next coming season when they're going to be getting a lot of looks. Etienne, Chark, Marvin Jones is the only vet in the room. Laviska Shenault, they're all going to be having the ball put in their breadbasket a lot by the first overall pick this year. So as a QB2, an option I really like. Let's recap the team here really quick before hitting it for the day. Russell Wilson, elite upside at that quarterback spot. Got an elite wide receiver duo there in Seattle and has some wheels he can use on occasion for us. CMC and Joe Mixon, man up the top 2 running back spots on this team. I love the floor I have here. And then McCaffrey gives me a ceiling I feel really good about for these standard leagues to go out there and make a splash on the league. Justin Jefferson gives me a floor as well as a ceiling. I think on a week-to-week basis, he can give me elite yardage output, good target numbers, which will help him get there, and then he can find the end zone here and there as well. OBJ is a little bit more of a streaky play. He's going to be a boom or bust pick, but the booms are going to be pretty nice for this roster. Darren Waller, an incredibly safe and high upside pick at the tight end spot, with JK and Rojo at the 2 flex spots as my RBs 3 and 4. 2 players, I think their floors aren't all the best, but they have some dang good ceilings. The Browns, give me some of that pass rush, some of that improved secondary from this offseason. I think that'll be a defense that I always say, look for a pass rush, and a secondary is a bonus. If you can get a pass rush with your fancy defense, you'll be getting QB hits, which turn into sacks, which turn into inaccurate passes, which turn into interceptions. You get the point. You see where I'm going here. Fumbles, etc., etc. If you're getting to the quarterback, you're disrupting the whole offense, which will help you put up fancy QB numbers. Samuel's got high upside, not much of a floor. Naheem Hines was kind of a blunder pick. I said at the time, it's a half PPR move there. The clock was at 1 second, and I had to pick. I didn't want Mike Gesicki. No more comments on no more comments. I'm just here so I won't get fined. Devonte Smith at the next spot. I think he can be the number 1 wideout for the Philly offense this year, but still not an incredibly elite upside play in standard leagues. I think the volume will be more key here for those half PPR teams. Jamal Williams, Trey Sermon, rounding out that running back group, a super deep unit. Sermon gives me some elite upside. Jamal Williams, I think, has some standalone value in that Detroit offense. And then Aguilar is the field stretcher. He can score touchdowns. He's a vet. He can find the seam in the defense. He'll be a big play guy. I think he's better with Mac Jones under center, but we'll see what he can do with Cam. And then Trevor Lawrence, a very good backup option. I think I've got him, as my QB 14 or 15 for this season. I don't think that he'll do much worse than that by any means. I think that's pretty much his floor. And if he hits the ceiling, he might be a fancy monster. So that'll do it for today's Friday episode of Mock Draft Week here on the channel. Day 5, we're heading into Day 6 tomorrow. Remember, if you hit up that community Discord invite, you can get yourself the opportunity to be a part of the future mock drafts for the rest of the summer. Obviously, as I do things throughout the season, I'll be interacting with you guys and giving you some input, analysis, and whenever I've got time, I'll be dropping in my thoughts into that Discord chat. So one more time, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you for tomorrow's episode. Peace out.